Welcome. We have a very special guest today, Morris Wolff, the author of Whatever Happened to Raoul Wallenberg, which I read on Kindle and had this blurb, very impressive. All lawyers and human rights advocates who wish to contribute to the good and to be master builders of justice in our country must read this book. Barack Obama, President of the United States. And wait, there's more. It had another blurb. In this fascinating book, Morris records the details of his 27-year search for Wallenberg. But most of all, you will read a good book and witness how much one man can do to achieve justice. William J. Clinton, President of the United States. So two ex-presidents have endorsed this book, which really is quite an achievement, I must say. So with that, I want to give the floor for a minute to Mr. Wolff. I will say a little bit by way of introduction. We met totally by chance. We were at the Sarasota Opera watching Stephelio with our wives, and he came up to me in the lobby, said, do I know you? And I didn't know, but as we talked, it turned out he was an expert in Raoul Wallenberg, and I've always felt guilty that when I made my film, Who Shall Live and Who Shall Die, about the War Refugee Board, that I did not go into the Wallenberg case. At that time, it was because Wallenberg was so famous elsewhere. I didn't want it to be a 3-hour film, and I thought it was covered. But I now regret that, and I feel grateful that Morris, or Beshert, as he said, gave me the chance to fill in that gap, because obviously Wallenberg was on a mission from the War Refugee Board in the US government, and that's one of the reasons he spent the rest of his life in prison in Russia, and it's a tragedy that needs to be addressed. So with that said, Morris Wolff, if you could tell us, first of all, this is one of your 4 books. What are your other books?
Well, my other books basically focus on Wallenberg and other human beings who have stepped forward to achieve justice. Whatever happened to Raoul Wallenberg has now been taken by Atticus Publishing and turned into a very exciting book called Right Hand Man to Justice, and deals with all the human beings who have stepped forward to try to achieve justice for their fellow man. And they include Martin Luther King, other human beings who worked with Martin Luther King for the whole idea of civil rights. I went to Washington right out of law school to work for John Sherman Cooper, one of the leaders of the civil rights movement in the United States Senate. And in that capacity, I met several international leaders for human rights, including Ludwig Erhard from Germany, Willy Brandt, the mayor of Berlin, Kwame Nkrumah, the president of Ghana, whom I met in Ghana on the landing strip. Larry mentions Beshert. Well, Beshert has a concept of Hebrew reality of there are no mistakes, there are no chances. I met Kwame Nkrumah on the airstrip in Ghana along with Patrice Lumumba just 3 months before Lumumba was assassinated. And at that time, I was a champion of justice for students. I was the president of the ISEC International Student Exchange Program. I'm not wandering from the subject at all. It's all related to justice. And at that time, we were students for justice and students for peace. And I hailed Mr. Lumumba and I hailed Kwame Nkrumah by just shouting out on the airstrip, Mr. Lumumba, I bring you greetings from Philadelphia. And they stopped and we chatted. And Mr. Nkrumah ended up giving me $40,000 to fund the exchange of the students whom I was representing. But back to the subject, I've always been a champion for peace, starting with the Germantown Friends School in Philadelphia, which told us to be champions of peace. And I was the president of the student council there. But back to the subject at hand, I went to Yale Law School on a scholarship. Again, nothing by chance. So my whole life has been given pro bono, I might add. The whole Wallenberg case, now no longer just 27 years, but 42 years, I've donated my time free of charge to trying to rescue Raoul Wallenberg.
All right. And since we've gone there, you also have another book called Wallenberg's Champion. You said that you can get for $3 now on Kindle on Amazon. And what does that cover?
That covers the constant, unending effort to find Wallenberg. As I've mentioned to you, and this is a first, and this is breaking news, I went to Russia with the U.S. Ambassador David Evans, and this has been under wraps because I promised David Evans not to reveal this fact until 20 years had passed from his death. David Evans died young at 64 in the year 2000, which of course is 25 years ago. And I promised him and his wife that I would not disturb the fact that David Evans broke protocol with the State Department by going with me because he cared as deeply as I did. And he used all of his, I would say, shenanigans and tricks to get behind the Iron Curtain with me. And we went up the Volga River by boat to Kazan, and we found Wallenberg totally alive and well and ready for release, according to the Russians. But they played their dirty tricks at the last minute. We were about to bring him out of Kazan and home, and they reversed their promise to us, to the two of us, to let him go. David Evans used all of his goodwill with the Russians. He had been in the U.S. Foreign Service for 40 years. And you can do the math on that. That means that as soon as he got out of Germantown Friends School and Harvard Law School, he went with me to, well, not as soon as he got out, but as soon as he got out of the Harvard University and the Harvard Law School, he went into the Foreign Service and he devoted himself to good works. And the two of us went in the late 90s, 1998, to Russia to bring Wallenberg home. More on that in my book. I'm not going to divulge too much at this time.
Right. Well, I do want to ask you some question. How did you know that that was really Wallenberg and not a substitute or a decoy?
From our conversation with him in the, not his jail cell, they brought him out of his jail cell into a common room. And he described to us some of the work he did in Budapest in saving Jews. And he described to us some of the Jewish truisms in the language that he picked up in his devotion to Jewish people. And he even described to us his roommate at the University of Michigan, Saul King, K-I-N-G, who he used to go home with for the holidays because going home to Sweden was too far to go home. We were persuaded that his interest in sports and bike riding and everything that he said, he was true blue. He couldn't have been anybody other than Raoul Wallenberg. His saving of Jews and the techniques he used to save Jews, he was a real McCoy.
Let me ask you another question. You did say to me beforehand that he said something to you that was biblical and that you thought was further evidence. He said to you, turn your face to God and God will turn his face to you, which I looked up and comes from the 27th Psalm. The Lord is my light and salvation. You have said, "Seek my face." My heart says to you, "Your face, Lord, do I seek." So, why do you think that was something that was evidence that that was really Raoul Wallenberg?
Well, it tied us all together. I happen to be Jewish, and I remember that being said in our Reformed Jewish service at the end of the service each time. It's one of the most sacred things that we say in our faith. Yivarechecha Adonai barechecha. And so I remember that even as a child, and as you've just quoted it now with your very excellent research of the subject, it's a precious saying, and it's an intimate saying. It's one of those intimate sayings that Abraham, I think, said to his son, the very son that he temporarily put on the altar to offer as a sacrifice to God, so that it ties us together. One of the things I love about my Judaism is that it's an intimate religion. It's a religion that invites us to speak to God directly because God speaks directly to us. And I think on our trip to the Soviet Union and our going up to Kazan, God was protecting us. It was a two-person trip, and it was a dangerous trip. It was a trip we took at our own choice. Nobody was protecting us. And it was a trip we took at David Evans' suggestion. He came up to me at one of our Germantown Friends School reunions, and we were a small class. We were a class of 40, 45, 50 students. And right there in old Philadelphia, the school's never moved. It's been there since 1845. And he said to me, "Morris, I understand you're working to try to rescue Raoul Wallenberg." I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "Well, the Russians pay me." I said, "They pay you? For what?" He said, "They pay me to go around and raise money for the restoration of some of their old mansions and homes and chateaus that are in bad shape. Uh, and I think I can turn some of that money into protection if you want me to go with you to try to retrieve Wallenberg. I think I know where he is." And Wallenberg had some of the same. I mean, David Meredith Evans had some of the same uncanny intelligence that I see you beginning to show, Larry, and that's a compliment. He was super bright, and he was always amazing me by the kinds of things he came up with. So we talked about it, and of course, I wanted to do it. I devoted my adult life, as it were, to trying to rescue Wallenberg. And many people would ask me, "Why did you do that? You could have been playing more of your adult tennis that you love to play." I said, they asked Wallenberg why he did it, and he said he had no choice. And here was a Lutheran going to rescue Jews. There's no sense to it in the everyday world, but there's sense to it in the cosmic world. That's where God taps people to do certain brave things. So we, in turn, David Evans and I, we were tapped to do brave things. There's no explanation. Only God can explain. So we had a great experience. It fell short by that much, but it was worth doing. We both survived. Unfortunately, David Evans survived less than I did, but nonetheless, it was a great trip, and I don't regret having done it.
Let me ask you a question about that. David M. Evans was really a big shot in the State Department. He was actually at the time in the 90s, he was the ambassador to the OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. for Russia, and he was in charge of human rights, and he was very well respected. You're saying this operation you two did off the books. He was not given permission to do this. He did this on his own initiative. You must have been disappointed when it fell through. You said you were sworn to secrecy because I think he could have gotten in trouble if it had come out. But how did you feel going back empty-handed? You said you actually stopped working on the case after that. What emotions did you feel?
No, we didn't stop working on the case at all. What we did was we went quiet about the case because we thought we were just at the edge of being able to go back and to do the necessary of signing the final letters to get him out. In other words, now we had met and we knew Wallenberg was alive. And we thought that the tiny slip that allowed the Russians to hold on to him temporarily would be changed by David, still in good repute, very good repute, and being the total diplomat that he was a great, if I may use the term, actor in the sense that he registered both disbelief and disappointment. But he had all these friends in the system who were still interested in making him happy because they wanted him to make them happy by raising money both within Russia and within the United States among people who wanted to build these dachas and other big houses back up again. David could raise millions of dollars. So they still had a hold on David, and David had a hold on them.
Yet it never happened. Sad to say. Let's go back in time a little, up to that moment from the beginning. I think when you told me your story, your work on the Wallenberg case began in the 1970s in the Nixon administration. Is that right?
That is correct. I was tapped by the family under most unusual circumstances. I was a professor of international law at the University of Pennsylvania, which I enjoyed very much during my practice of law at that time, as a partner with the Honorable Harold Stassen, who had been one of the original signers of the United Nations Charter and had been governor of Minnesota at age 29, known as the Boy Wonder. He was so brilliant. And of course, I loved working with him because he was like a father to me. That is to say, by now he was well beyond age 29. And he had been the president of the University of Pennsylvania and decided to stay in Philadelphia because he had many sponsoring people, even though he had great ties in Minnesota. And he was a great internationalist and deeply generous. He would sponsor my trips for giving lectures at different places in Europe. By then, I spoke German, French, Spanish, some Japanese. I had really become a linguist, and I love languages. And I had also served by then as the international president of the ISEC International Student Exchange Program, served 3 years in Geneva as the international president of that program, which I enjoyed deeply. So my life had a major international dimension to it and would forevermore. I attended a conference one night and Bashir again was listening to a lecture that didn't entice me, and I walked out to have some fresh air. I did not smoke cigarettes, fortunately. Maybe that's why, or one of the reasons why today I'm 89 and looking forward to my 90th birthday. And I thank God for that. And I
Baruch
thank
Hashem.
my wife as well. Um, Anyway, I met Anthony D'Amato, and to make a long story short, we talked about international law, and he said to me, "I want you to know about a case. Raoul Wallenberg is sitting in a Soviet prison, and he's done nothing wrong. He's been there for 39 years, and he's a Lutheran, and he saved the Jewish people of Europe, 100,000, and was thrown in jail." I said, "That's impossible." He said, "No, it's real." So I immediately went to work on the case with Tony, who was a Renaissance man. He was not only doing law, but he was producing Grease on Broadway. I laugh because that's quite a stretch of the talent. Um,
Didn't you tell me that he actually uh, played the piano for you and sang to Dream the Impossible Dream and told you that you would be spending the rest of your life on this case?
uh, he didn't tell me I'd be on the case for the rest of my life, but we did sing The Impossible Dream that night together. And we are both, uh, unfortunately, he's gone to a higher place in life and another piano, but we loved each other in the best sense of the word. And we began to devote ourselves to the Wallenberg case. I sued the Wallenberg case in federal court. Um, that was back in 1981, 82.
But
I
wait, before we go up to the case, you told me you had met with Henry Kissinger in the Nixon administration, that Kissinger tried to help, but then Nixon stopped it. And John Ehrlichman later told you it was because Nixon didn't want to upset Brezhnev at the time he was negotiating detente, because Brezhnev had stolen the diamonds that Hungarian Jews left in Wallenberg's safe after he, Brezhnev, personally arrested Wallenberg as a Soviet army general. Do you believe this was the reason?
those are complications to the case. Those are real facts that made my work much more difficult. The key part, though, is I found the right judge, and that was by spin of the wheel. I had nothing to do with the selection, but
Okay, but I still have to interrupt you. You have to forgive me because your case is in 1984, if I'm correct. But
right.
you also said you were working with Stu Eisenstadt in the Carter administration, but you told me he was unable to persuade Carter to help rescue Wallenberg. Do you know why not?
No, those are part of that's life. I mean, nothing is simple. And while I am pursuing my verdict, which was a $39 million verdict against the Russians, first of its kind ever against the Russians, that's where my focus was. The natterings, as I call them, of the politics going on at the time were everyday realities. Men are not capable of rising to the occasion. That's all
Well,
I can tell you.
one politician who did rise to the occasion, and I think you told me this was why your case succeeded, was Tom Lantos, a congressman who wrote the bill making Wallenberg an honorary American citizen, which he got passed, and then Reagan signed in a grand ceremony. And then Reagan said something. He looks forward to the day that Wallenberg will be able to sit under his fig tree, and so he was personally committing himself. So that was before your case, right?
No, that was running just simultaneous with. The timing was all together. I had visited with Reagan before he signed that bill.
Okay, but it was part of your strategy that if he were a honorary American citizen, then
Exactly.
he would have standing, as we now know that word, to sue the Russians.
That is absolutely correct. And therefore it was a deep disappointment when I went back to meet with Mr. Reagan that the man who sits today on the Supreme Court of the United States canceled my meeting with Reagan.
Well, let's get specific, because this is something you told me after I met you at the opera that I didn't believe, but I checked in the Reagan library. You had arranged for a meeting with Reagan to get him to be active on this. And it was through a friend of yours from Philadelphia, Faith Whittisley, who was a White House appointment secretary. And it was then referred to the legal department, Fred Fielding and his assistant, John Roberts. John Roberts is not only on the Supreme Court now, he's Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And John Roberts wrote a memo to Fielding saying they should dodge the issue and refer it back to the State Department. This is the same State Department, which up till then, Evans wasn't around doing that then, had done nothing. And you never got that meeting, and you never got the meeting with Reagan to activate, because what's the point of being an honorary citizen if nothing happens? And indeed, the State Department said, well, honorary citizen wouldn't apply because there were no honorary citizens when the Constitution was written, which even Roberts said in his memo was ridiculous because it would mean you couldn't have an ambassador to a country that didn't exist when the Constitution was written. And it was absurd. Also, interestingly enough, there are only 3 honorary citizens of the United States: Wallenberg, Churchill, and Lafayette. Well, Lafayette also spent a number of years in a prison in Olmutz from the Austrian emperor, and the United States failed to rescue him. But luckily, he was released before he died when he was in his 70s.
Not only that, but I was sitting in President Reagan's office November 11th, 1983, waiting for my scheduled appointment with President Reagan, having chatted with Faith Whittlesey, because Faith Whittlesey and I go back virtually to high school, and Faith was the beloved appointment secretary of President Reagan. Nobody was more beloved and better taken care of than Faith Whittlesey. She was a person of high regard in that White House, and she was so embarrassed when Roberts came out and said, "Your appointment has been canceled." And Faith looked at him and said, "What? How could his appointment be canceled? He's sitting here waiting to see the president at 11 o'clock. It's now 5 of 11. And Roberts offered no further explanation of the rudeness of the cancellation without regard. So Roberts and Fielding, like 2 little schoolboys in 6th grade, had engineered the cancellation. And the amazing part on the other side of rudeness was high behavior by the courts. The Judge Barrington Parker, who ruled my way, his son, Judge Barrington Parker Jr., was one of my students when I taught at Morehouse College in Atlanta a couple of years after that, and who came up to me and said, "My father was so proud to be the judge on your original Wallenberg case." So things work out. Justice works out.
Well, let me interrupt you there, because you got a good ruling from Judge Parker, but then mysteriously, a couple of years later, the case was somehow moved to another court and another judge, and he ruled against you and canceled it mysteriously out of nowhere.
Hijinks, and bad behavior. Bad behavior that when the good Lord up above met these people, he took their robes away.
Okay, well, let's hope they got celestial justice.
They are freezing in the cold somewhere.
All right. And the Bush administration, the first George H.W. Bush administration, you said you tried to get him involved through Faith Whittisley, but he was unresponsive. Do you have any idea why? He later gave you a Points of Light Award with Fred
Right,
Fielding.
right, right, right. Well, sometimes they felt guilty conscience for knowing they did the wrong thing.
Okay. But now we get to the Clinton administration. Not only did he blurb your book, but obviously he must have been somehow aware of David Evans' operation. Um, and perhaps it was because Tony D'Amato, your law partner, was Hillary's former political science professor at Wellesley. And you said you also had some help behind the scenes from William Colby in locating Wallenberg. You said you came very close. Then you said Colby's mysterious death may have been related to Wallenberg. Why do you say that?
Colby was an excellent canoeer or boat person. And here we find that he mysteriously dies on a Sunday afternoon while out canoeing on the tranquil Winnemucca River. And friends of his who were with him in the CIA, who had lunch with me thereafter, the week after, said he got snuffed. It's not my word. William Colby, in my estimation, was a very straightforward, patriotic person. He helped me every inch of the way on Wallenberg. He helped me to get appointments with people that I otherwise would have had great difficulty in seeing. As you know, um, seeing people in Washington is not always the easiest thing in the world. And sometimes when you see people through others who are quite respected and venerable, it's much, much easier. And Bill Colby was one of those people who were who was very, very respected, no matter what else might have ever been said about him. And I never saw anything negative said about him. So,
But at the end, he was no longer there to help you. And then you went to Russia. And I find your story credible, even though it sounded incredible at first. And then, even though the Clinton administration was being helpful, that all stopped. The deal was never made. Wallenberg was never released. Um, what's the explanation for that?
there comes a time with everything when you have to both look yourself in the mirror and you have to look at the balance of your life and say, I've done as much as I can do, or others have to step forward to assist. And um, an interview like this may lead to someone like Jane Pauley, who was so kind to me, have me on the Sunday morning show, may come forward and say, Morris, I saw your excellent interview with Larry Jarvik, and gee, I want to bring you back. I'd like to hear more about this sighting with Wallenberg and how you felt about it and what you think might be the proper closure of the case. Um, and we want to put a proper finale to it. My
Let me, before we go on, we have one more thing. You said after all that, you were in touch with the Israelis and the Mossad had a rescue attempt, but they also failed. Wallenberg was moved at the last minute. Obviously, somebody squealed on the Israeli side, and they couldn't get him either. So you're not alone in having a failed rescue attempt, according to tell us about the Mossad attempt.
well, I had worked in Israel. I had good contacts in Israel, and I had interest in Israel in my whole life, particularly in the Wallenberg part of my life, so that the Israelis made their own effort um, to rescue Wallenberg. And as I provide in my book, not only they make an effort, but they use some of the same techniques in other rescue efforts.
But they too failed. I mean, it's incredible that all of these people are doing stuff and nothing works. And then you said you met with President Obama, who blurbed your book. And I saw a picture of him in the synagogue in Sweden at a remembrance ceremony for Wallenberg with Wallenberg relatives. So
Mm-hmm.
he had championed the case. But again, nothing happened. Do you know why that didn't go anywhere?
No, just that it was terribly difficult for whatever reason. This matter became an incredibly challenging uh, operation, whatever. As you have pointed out, it seems that everyone who has gone after it has come so close, but um, his spirit lives on. There's no doubt about it. He was a fighter, and those who have risen to the occasion have been have been decent people, equal to the cause. I mean, starting all the way back with Anthony D'Amato, anyone who has been willing to put their energy forward and do their best, it's been able to bring out their best. I mean, my work on that Wallenberg litigation, uh, which can't be underestimated, was original work, was original research. I can see myself all over again sitting in my home in Chestnut Hill in Philadelphia, balancing my legal work for being a professor at Delaware Law School, then going all the way out to Nevada to be the dean of the first law school in Nevada, carrying my Wallenberg work with me, being the dean of the law school there, carrying on uh, presenting the case in the district court in Philadelphia, then district court in Washington. God gave me the energy, and we never quit, and we met good people. Guy Miller Struve, the New York firm of Davis, Polk, and Wardwell, top flight people, top flight people. The dean of the um, NYU Law School, Dean Redlick, um, just the best. David Meredith Evans, cream of the crop, cream of the crop. So in many ways, just say I met the best. Oh, people like the Nobel Peace Prize winners. Uh, uh, they're there on that book, on the back of that book. You can probably help me out on the title.
Yeah, I have the Kindle edition, but I'm guessing it's Elie Wiesel,
Elie
usually.
Wiesel, yes, Elie
Yeah.
Wiesel, and the comments that he made on my behalf of the work. So the testimonials and comiums that came forth, the admirations, it's all worth it. You can't buy them. You can't buy them. So
Let me just say, you also did inspire me. In 2003, my mother was rescued by a different diplomat, Aristides de Sousa Mendes of Portugal. She escaped through France from Holland, and he gave her a visa. And there was a delegation of uh, families of people who'd been saved by different diplomats that was organized by Eric Saul that went to meet Colin Powell in 2003. I was somehow in that delegation, I think because I lived in Washington. And there was, I think, Guy von Dardel and Nana Annan, the wife of Kofi Annan. It might have been Nina Lagergren. I don't really remember. But because of meeting you and interviewing you, I put in a Freedom of Information Act request because uh, I think it was Nana, but maybe it was Nita Lagergren, gave a letter to Colin Powell at that meeting asking for his help in finding Raoul Wallenberg or his burial plot. And I never heard what happened. I assume nothing. So I put in a FOIA request. What was the result? Did they find it? Do we know where it is? A lot has happened. The Soviet Union has fallen, etc. And so we'll see. Maybe the wheels of justice turn exceedingly slow, but exceedingly fine. Maybe Secretary of State Rubio, who's a refugee from communism himself, will see it in his heart to either release the data they have or find the data that must be there. As I understand it, the United States has copies of the entire Soviet archive from 1989. So, although it may have been destroyed, one other thing that bothers me is that I looked around on there are many Raoul Wallenberg foundations, and the International Raoul Wallenberg Foundation got a letter from the Russians June 15th, 2006, from the embassy in Washington that said, well, they had rehabilitated Wallenberg. They no longer considered him a criminal or a spy or anything bad, but that all the evidence was destroyed. And they still are going to confirm that he was killed on July 17th, 1947, as a result of political repression by Stalin personally, and nobody else is at fault, and they can't blame anybody else. Which struck me as peculiar because everything I read says, even before you got involved, there was evidence he was alive after the date they say he died. Why do you think the Russians are doing that instead of saying, hey, this is a legacy of the Stalinist era, Brezhnev era, communism, but we want to just set the record straight. Here's where he's buried, or here's where he was cremated, or whatever. And because he can't be alive anymore, sad to say. Why do you think they still are maintaining this as late as official documents in 2006?
I think you raise a good point, and I think just in that last thing, he can't still be alive, sad to say, would be the start of it. But then saying, but still, he had a legacy of humanity to his life. There is no way that one can negate the heroics of his life. He went to Budapest as an act of decency. He rescued 100,000 innocent Jews. He was a heroic example of what goodness is all about. And the nobility of his life will be an example, a shining example for young people for ages to come. And the work of Morris Wolff in volunteering to try to find him and to bring him home is a shining light for all lawyers to emulate for years to come. We need more people like that who volunteer, come what may, to find him and to bring him home. Something of
Okay.
that sort.
So you're not going to comment on why the Russians are saying this. Of course, Churchill said the Russians are a riddle wrapped in an enigma, in a puzzle or whatever.
I'm not going to elevate. I'm not going to elevate rotten behavior by one stitch. In other words, I will elevate Wallenberg, a schoolboy who goes to Michigan to study, a schoolboy who has enough charm to attract Ingrid Bergman and Rebecca Lindfors and play polo and to befriend Bernard King. He was, he and I had a lot in common. A lot in common. That's why I was attracted to him. someone who loved languages, who had a lot of ausgelassen to him, a lot of be my friend, and you know, hello, who are you? Do I know you? Do I know you, Larry Jarvik? And I'm so glad I came to know you. You're one more friend in my life, and you will be for the rest of your life because I happen to like you. It proved to be a good choice. And that was Wallenberg, too. Wallenberg was friendly. And the same thing with David Evans. I was always David Evans' friend. Back to school. David Evans was a bit of a introvert, but he saw me as an extrovert. He rallied to my campaign for student council president. He would have never run for student council president, but that brain that he had, and he wanted to be associated with a Morris Wolff back then and later on. And it was a great friendship, great friendship. But I wouldn't elevate them any more than I would elevate those people I discussed with you earlier this week. Forget them, they're trash. And I'm following your advice. Trash belongs in the trash can.
All right. Okay, let's wrap this up. I want to go over the books that you've written. They're all on Amazon, you said, or Barnes and Noble. People can get them. The first is the one that I held up on Kindle, Whatever Happened to Raoul Wallenberg, which is about your rescue effort to get Wallenberg out of the Soviet Union.
Case. Also about
Oh, it's also about the law
young
case.
lawyers
Yes.
will love this because it's about the impossible case that becomes possible. And young lawyers will see it as they see me maneuver within the case and get lucky with the right judge, which is a happenstance.
Yeah, unfortunately, there was, just like with all the other Wallenberg thing, some skullduggery behind the scenes afterwards that deep sixed it. I mean, it's a really Washington story to me, because it's like the same thing happened in the Second World War with saving the Jews. Reports were in the State Department, and they just dodged the issue. Then your second book is Wallenberg's Champion. This is the material you didn't put in the first book because you promised secrecy about this trip to Russia, right?
Right.
And then your third book is Lucky Conversations. This is sort of your celebrity book about famous people you've met, right?
Right. And had conversations with and
Yeah.
and derived pearls of wisdom from the conversation.
So it's also an inspirational book. And then your fourth book is Morris Wolff, Right Hand Man to History. This is the one that's coming out May 9th. And do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's an overstated title. I'm not quite the right hand man to history, but with that hyperbole in mind, it's a wonderful voyage through my career. It starts off with my going to Washington, working for both Kennedys, and they buy me a bike so that I can travel between the White House and the Justice Department.
Now, young people may not know which Kennedys you're talking about. Can you give their full names just so
Okay,
people
yeah.
know?
Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy and President John F. Kennedy. And their offices are just 4 blocks apart. And they're afraid that J. Edgar Hoover is wiretapping their conversations. So they trust me and they hire me on Bobby Kennedy's payroll to go between Justice Department and White House with communications, private communications between the two. That's only one aspect of this book, but I am right hand man to history. I have access to the Oval Office at any time, including the crazy day when the nuclear submarine Thresher, Thresher, goes down to the bottom of the ocean, and everybody in the White House thinks it's the Russians. who have done it, but I do the correspondences for 2 full days, 24 hours, and we find out it was a accident of mechanical nature, and it's incidents like that. And I'm working with Salinger, the press secretary, Dean Rusk, Secretary of State, McNamara, Secretary, um, all the cabinet members, and I'm in and out of the White House, in and out of the Justice Department, writing the Civil Rights Act of '64 and having the time of my life, and walking down the corridors of history.
Well, I'll have to get that myself from Amazon.com because that does sound fascinating. Those are mythic days of Camelot. So.
Oh, I love the way you put that. I like that. I'm going to put that in the press release. Good.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't want to tire you out too much. We can always come back again if there are any other developments. I mean, I have just want to finish up by saying, I know you had some run-ins with people who you thought were on your side, and there are always personality conflicts, but no other lawyer has been able to find out the information. Nobody else could get Wallenberg out, and nobody else could prove he was alive or dead, and nobody else could get the Soviets to admit anything. So I think, given the realities, you did about as well as any human being could do in the circumstances. I mean, I know the International Foundation had the Canadian international lawyer, Irwin Cotler, who's a big macher, as we say, and he hasn't done any better than you. So
Irwin Cotler has done side work of mine. Irwin is a nice human being. He never got into Russia. He never got into Wallenberg's cell. I know Irwin very, very well. He is a very, very good Patty along. Um, I can just say that, let me see what the best metaphor could be. We like each other very much. I'll just say that.
Very. Let me just finish with one last thing. If you could ask President Trump and the Trump administration to do one thing to get closure, to get the final story on what happened to Wallenberg out, to settle this issue so it doesn't remain a mystery, an unsolved mystery forever, what would it be? What would be the one thing the Trump administration could do to get this solved?
There is absolutely nothing they could do to get this solved. This will remain an open mystery, not an open sore, but an open mystery. It would be false and phony for anyone to claim that they have they have closure on this matter. It will remain, it is what it is. It's a standing story of heroism. And sometimes in this world of ours, we have to accept things exactly as they are. It was a brutal mistreatment of a very decent human being. And that's how it is. That's how it will remain. There'll be no closure. A brutal mistreatment of a divine person.
Well, I'm sure it's a depressing note to end on, and I'm hoping and praying you're wrong and that someday we do find out, not only for us and his family, but for the world, because it's just so terrible. Like you said, when we first met, the story reminded you of The Man in the Iron Mask, something by Alexander Dumas, someone locked away forever and then forgotten. And it's hard to believe such things could happen in our lifetime and in our world that's not fiction.
I don't see it that way. I really don't. I don't see it in any negative way. I see it more Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Sometimes God leaves things open. Sometimes God shows that man is unfortunately capable of the most dastardly, terrible acts, and God invites us to be better.
All right. On that note, I think we should close the interview. And once again, I would recommend that people go to Amazon.com or Barnes and Noble, or even you can order through your local bookseller. I'm sure uh, whatever happened to Raoul Wallenberg, Wallenberg's Champion, Lucky Conversations, and Morris Wolff, right-hand man to history. This is only a small taste of what's in those books. And it's been a pleasure and a privilege to interview you. And I look forward to reading the reviews when they come out.
Pleasure to know you, Larry. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank you. Bye-bye.